Well, the book is called The Goal, the stories about our national passion. And who better to talk about this amazing book? We all love hockey, don't we? It's the author. His name is Andrew Caddell. Nice to have you on the show, Andrew.
Thank you.
This is quite
great
the book.
to be here.
What's the story behind this book? Okay, so it was self-published at first?
I self-published.
Then it got so big that I need to say that. Go ahead, because you're going to be modest about this.
Well, I self-published and I sold about 500 copies. And a publisher in Toronto asked me if I wanted to publish at a more national level and have a broader reach and to have more photos. Because when you self-publish, you're limited in the number of photos you can publish. And also, I thought there were about 3 or 4 stories that I wanted to add that I had been in the process of writing after I published initially. And I've added those. So there's 4 more stories, which I think sort of broaden the reach of the book, because one's about Boston Bruins fans, one's about Toronto Maple Leafs fans, one's about women's hockey, and another's about my grandfather, who was a semi-pro hockey player in Quebec and would appeal to people who are interested in the history of hockey.
This book is so crammed with great information. I had a chance to thumb through it and read some of the stories. I can tell, by the way, that you're a Habs fan. And Jean Beliveau is very prevalent as well. There's the number 4.
Number 4.
Back in the day, they didn't have to put Beliveau on the back, right?
That's right, because everybody knew who they were.
There were so few players. Now there's about 800 teams.
Yeah.
Now, what is it about being a Habs fan?
Well, it's about suffering, like being a Leafs fan.
Yeah,
this year it has been. I grew up in Montreal, and for me, the Canadiens represented what was the best about Canada, because you had Doug Harvey and Jean Beliveau and Toe Blake, and you had in the later years you had Larry Robinson and Guy Lafleur. It was always a combination of the best of English Canada and the best of French Canada playing together as a team, and to me that's what Canada's all about. So that's what really inspired me. Now, a lot of my father's friends and my dad himself, they were Maroons fans, and when the Maroons folded, it was a disappointment for them, and a lot of people in Montreal refused to support the Canadiens. They ended up supporting the Boston Bruins instead.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What is your motivation behind writing this book?
Well, you know, we live in such sort of dystopian times that where there's so much bad news, and I thought that it would be great to have a book that had lots of stories of good news and where there are happy endings. I mean, there's a certain arc of the story and there's a certain struggle, but in the end, there are happy endings, and I think that people want to read stories like that.
Okay, so you, I don't know if it's a happy ending or a tough ending for yourself when your career. There's a reason why it's called The Goal, and it has to do with you?
Well, I was the world's worst goaltender when I was 10 years old. I thought I was pretty good. I'd been not bad the year before, and the year after, actually, we won the championship. But that year, I was just struggling, and we lost every game. And the players on our team were phenomenal, but they played as individuals, not as a team. So I had breakaway after breakaway after breakaway. And so I decided I was going to learn how to skate and shoot properly. So I would spend hours going to the local rink, carrying my equipment about a mile to the rink and then back. And night after night doing this, finally learned how to skate. And at the end of every practice, I would skate up on my own breakaway, go over to the right dot, shoot from there, catch the top corner, and that was my dream, to have my own breakaway. Well, in the last game of the year, my coach allowed me to play out instead of playing in goal. And as luck would have it, a fellow who'd scored about 100 goals on me was in goal for the other team. And I got my own breakaway, and I scored on him. So that's the goal,
Your book is very family-based.
It is.
And we have an exceptional picture that you brought with you as well. So maybe you could describe who's in that picture, who's so important to you.
Well, this was these were the champions in Quebec City, the junior champions, and my grandfather, who's right there, Burton Ramsey, was an aspiring semi-professional hockey player at the time, and he was very, very good. His cousin was on the Quebec Bulldogs, which was the professional team in Quebec at the time, went on to become the NHL. But unfortunately, his eyesight faded. He had to wear glasses, and so he couldn't be a professional hockey player. He ended up being a very, very good competitive tennis player and athlete into his 80s. And but he had some great stories about learning how to skate on the frozen St. Lawrence in front of Lévis, walking across the St. Lawrence as a child, skating across the St. Lawrence. When the ice floes broke up, they would walk from plank to plank between the floes. And then he played against Joe Malone, who was one of the great hockey players of all time, Patty Moran, who was one of the great goaltenders, and then he was transferred by his bank to Chicoutimi, and he ended up playing against Georges Vézina.
Oh, wow, that's a big name.
And I didn't realize that until I did the research to discover that he was in Chicoutimi at the same time, and I had a letter from him to his mother saying he was playing for the Chicoutimi Victorias, and it turned out that that team played against Georges Vézina's team, but there's no record of him scoring a goal on Vézina, which is too bad.
I'm sure it happened.
But
can you tell us who Marjorie is?
Pardon?
Marjorie.
Oh, Marjorie. Marjorie Ross was the greatest women hockey player that I ever knew, and one of the greatest people. There's sort of a whole mythology about her, and there she is on the playing behind us when she was about 11 years old. She was the scoring champion in our league in Montreal. 2 years in a row, they won the scoring. She won the scoring championship, and their team won the championship in our town's league. And she went on to be the MVP in both her college and university teams. But as I mentioned in the book, unfortunately, there was no professional hockey in those days for women, and there was no Olympic team. So her career ended in college and university, and she was. But she still had, she influenced and inspired a lot of young women to go on to greater things. And I thought about her when I went to the championship of the professional women's hockey at the Canadian Tire Centre last year. And I said, I've got to write a story about Marge. And so I called her up and I spent 2 hours talking to her, got some great anecdotes, and then put the story together. And
it's amazing.
Unfortunately,
really we're out of time, and I know that we could talk all day
I'm
about
sure
these
we
great
could.
stories, but please check it out. Andrew Caddell. The book is called The Goal.
On Amazon and Books on Beechwood and Chapters.
There you go. More daytime coming up.